Imagine a world where the scientific method just never existed. No experiments, no deduction, just pure blind luck. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into exactly what would happen if humanity, or even an advanced alien race, had to survive entirely without science. It's a wild thought experiment, so let's get right into it.
To really wrap our heads around this, I want you to picture a million-year-old alien civilization. Now, these aliens have absolute perfect memory. They never, ever forget a single thing they see or do. But here's the catch. They possessed absolutely zero abstract thought. Because they totally lack abstract reasoning, they just play around and they invent things purely by accident. They have literally no idea why anything actually works. If someone builds a cool new tool, everyone else can copy the exact physical motions to build it perfectly, thanks to that flawless memory. But they cannot deduce how to tweak it for a new purpose. Which brings us to Section 1, Without Science, an Alien Experiment. This mind-bending scenario actually comes from a world-building forum, and it asks us to picture a society relying strictly on trial and error, completely lacking any scientific deduction. The sheer limitation of this mindset is kind of fascinating when you think about it. In this civilization, discoveries happen strictly by pure chance. There's no predictive math. If a guy accidentally drops a wheel on a rod into a river and it starts spinning, they can copy it perfectly. But they will never purposely add, say, wooden wings to catch the water and improve it, because they just don't understand the underlying mechanics. The why is totally lost on them. As one forum user brilliantly put it, they're essentially trying to brute force science. It's exactly like that old analogy of 1,000 monkeys at a typewriter, just blindly mashing keys to brute force technological progress. They're trying every random thing until they get a result, with absolutely zero guiding logic. Okay, moving to Section 2, Brute Force and Accidental Discoveries. How far could a civilization actually get using only this blind method before they hit a brick wall? Well, let's compare the two. Scientific engineering uses predictive logic. You figure out why a material behaves a certain way, and then you purposefully apply that knowledge to solve a brand new problem. Brute force invention, on the other hand, relies entirely on accidental discovery without grasping the cause and effect at all. It is flying completely blind. Without the foresight that science provides, this accidental civilization would honestly probably destroy itself. Think about it. They might accidentally invent fire, sure, but because they can't predict long-term consequences, they might unintentionally burn down their entire forest. With all their resources gone, they'd suffer famine and just stagnate. They simply can't connect their immediate actions to widespread environmental consequences. All right, Section 3, Myth and Alchemy before modern science. Let's bring this back to Earth and see how humanity actually coped before the formal scientific method took hold. Because remember, for most of our history, we didn't have it either. While modern science expertly explains the physical rules of the world, like exactly why a river floods every spring, early humans relied heavily on myth. Myth was used to explain the origins and meaning of a world that felt completely uncontrollable. Where myth often preached a sort of resigned acceptance to nature's whims, science eventually gave us a real way to predict and actually manage them. But hey, it's really important to remember that our ancestors weren't just fumbling in the dark. Early attempts to understand nature, like alchemy, for example, weren't just primitive magic. Alchemy was actually a coherent, symbolic, empirical science. They were actively testing the waters of reality. They were just doing it through a highly symbolic lens rather than the strict mathematical one we use today. So, on to Section 4, Economic Stagnation and Barriers to Innovation. Here's the big question. If the scientific method is so incredibly powerful, and early humans were clearly trying to manipulate the world, why did humanity experience practically zero economic growth from 10,000 BC all the way to 1800 AD? Economic historian Gregory Clark points out some massive barriers during that incredibly long era. First off, we faced a total lack of intellectual property rights. No patents existed. We also had the legal constraints of serfdom, which kept most of the population tied down into the land. And to top it off, there were basically zero financial incentives to actually share new knowledge. Early innovators simply couldn't protect their ideas. Textile inventor Richard Roberts hit the nail on the head when he noted that a simple quart of ale could bribe a worker to give away your most valuable trade secrets. I mean, that's wild. This free rider problem meant that if you spent years inventing a better machine, someone else would just copy it for free, totally wiping out your profits. And because there was no real financial reward for scientific discovery, the absolute brightest minds in, say, the 1300s were drawn to much more profitable career paths, things like war, the church, trade, or law. Let's be real, back then, science just didn't pay the bills. Section 5. Philosophy of Reality. Understanding Science. Obviously, we eventually overcame those economic barriers, instituted patents, unleashed rapid innovation, and birthed the modern era we live in now. But what exactly is this scientific process that we finally unlocked?
Philosopher Roy Bosker has a concept called critical realism that helps explain this beautifully. He separates our human ideas from the actual physical universe. He calls our theories, our models, and our paradigms transitive objects. These are just the human-fashioned items of knowledge that we invent to try and make sense of things. But science works by using those human models to uncover what he calls intransitive objects. And these are the strictly independent laws and causal mechanisms of nature that exist totally regardless of human discovery. Things like gravity, chemical reactions, biology, these operate whether we know about them or not. But actually finding those underlying laws, it is incredibly difficult. It requires what Bhaskar calls experimental closure. It takes immense human effort, brilliant theoretical labor, and super rigorous experimental design to isolate systems in a laboratory. We basically have to shut out all the chaotic noise of the open world just to trigger these underlying mechanisms so we can actually study them in their pure form.
So why does this deep philosophical distinction actually matter to us? Well, because by identifying the real mechanisms of the world, we can finally overcome false beliefs. We don't have to rely on myth anymore, and we definitely don't have to blindly brute force our survival like those aliens. Truly understanding reality drives genuine human emancipation, freeing us from the unpredictable, chaotic whims of nature.
Which leaves us with a final, kind of provocative thought to chew on. As we hurtle into an era of incredibly complex technology, I'm talking about artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, you name it. Are we truly using scientific deduction to predict our long-term path? Or, deep down, are we still just a bunch of monkeys playing with shiny new tools in the dark, hoping we don't accidentally burn down the forest?